Great. All right, excellent. So thank you all for coming to the conversation with Ms. Lydia Millet. We've only got about 40 minutes. This is a standard class session time for us for the synchronous sessions in my class. So we're going to try and make the best use of that time. And I'm just going to remind everyone looks well-trained. You know what I mean? They have mics off. Unless you're using it, then you turn on the mic, right, for questions and the like. And then I had a simple structure here where I'm hoping to I'll do a little introduction of Lydia Millet based on the bio that she sent us, and then open with a few questions that we have, maybe say something about our course. And I'm hoping to get all of my students involved, asking their own questions about a children's Bible, which is her latest book, and also the writing process, your own writing process. She's a very prolific writer, and we have many students in the various courses that are represented here that are interested in writing. So I'm just admitting a few people in as we speak. So with that out of the way, I'd like to again welcome Lydia Millet to the class. In addition to members of my own class here at UB, at the University of Belize, we have some other students in the department in various courses in the Faculty of Education and Arts. And we have a few people from other fields. There are some people at UB in the Department of ERI, the Environmental Research Institute, that were interested. And so a few people they weren't able to make it, but they asked to see the recording of the session. So they've expressed their interest. I even got some people, because I did advertise it just personally through social media to see if there was somebody, some of my own contacts are interested in. Some people from all over in Malaysia also reached out and said, oh yeah, they need to see, but they're at a completely different time. I think it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. So I might be sharing that recording with a few people there. So thank you everybody for joining us. For those outside of UB, this is kind of like this is the classroom experience that we have right now with pandemic. We're doing all these online classes. I'm using this platform, Google Meet. And so this is what it's like. And many of us are kind of itching to get back into the classroom for face-to-face interaction, but the difficulties have forced us in some cases, and in other cases willingly jumped in to explore new tools, and it actually foregrounds these kinds of possibilities here, right? So I'm very happy that we were able to get you, Lydia, to come and talk to our class from such a long distance, all the way in Tucson, no? Arizona.
Yeah, outside Tucson in the desert, but yeah,
in the
close
desert,
enough.
outside.
Yeah.
Cool. And we're beaming in from all over Belize, different parts of Belize, which the virtual environment helps. And I think there's some other people here in other different locations internationally as well. So I'm just going to start with the information that you provided on the bio. For everyone here, Lydia Millet has written more than a dozen novels, story collections, often about the ties between people and animals. The novel that we are reading in the class is A Children's Bible, which is your latest novel. It's the finalist for the National Book Award in the US in fiction, one of the New York Times Book Review's best 10 books in 2020. I saw it on that list. In 2019, she received the Short Fiction Award of Merit from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And in 2010, her collection Love in Infant Monkeys was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She writes essays, opinion pieces, other ephemera, and has been an editor and writer at the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a group dedicated to fighting extinction and climate change since 1999. And as she said, she lives in the desert outside of Tucson, Arizona. So once again, welcome.
And once again, thanks for having me. It's really nice to be talking to, a bunch of folks so far away, and yeah, I'm psyched.
You've done lots of different interviews, no? I've seen a few of them online that were published. But yeah, I wondered if you were aware or conscious of some budding Belizean readership out here at all.
Yeah, the farthest away I've done a Zoom session on this book was actually Canada, so
okay, right,
opposite direction. But yeah.
All right, north. So now we're down south. Okay, maybe we could start there. So I was curious about your connection to Belize. And the place in this fiction. Maybe that's a good place to start. And I know you're from the United States, and I know that you visited Belize before. I got that from an email that you sent, right? And it was very interesting to note that a couple, at least, of your novels are actually set here in Belize. And so I asked that because as a Belizean, I'm interested in seeing how the country is represented outside. Unfortunately, a lot of Hollywood depictions of the country, it's like the standard exotic paradise or banana republic type of fare. Usually, you have Belize as this place where you would you absquatulate with your ill-gotten gains. You make some money somewhere and then you run off to Belize with the money. At least that's how it's represented in several movies that I've seen where they just have this reference to Belize. Anyway, I know Belize is not the setting for a children's Bible, but I wonder if you could just talk a bit about how Belize, what place Belize has in the trilogy that I think starts with How the Dead Dream. And
yeah, so
a place that Belizeans could start reading your work?
I mean, I would be delighted if you or they did read those books. I'm sure you would find much in there that is the product of fantasy. But I sort of allowed myself to get away with it because, many of my books refer to places I haven't been and are sort of constructed in, fanciful and even satirical ways. Belize actually is a place that I spent all of 10 days, maybe. So I have only the most sort of superficial tourist's understanding of it. And I partly wrote about it in those books because I wished I could go back there, and it was the closest I could come at the time to going back was actually to just kind of fantasize about it. So there's one book, the book called How the Dead Dream. A character goes to Belize. The main character sort of flees to Belize. So he's a sort of capitalist businessman figure, but he's very confused and suffering all these forms of loss. And so he goes there to kind of fulfill a bizarre dream of his. And then in the second book in that trilogy, the next main character, who's actually a guy who works for the IRS, so he's a tax collector in the U.S. He has this sort of midlife crisis where he finds out that his wife has been unfaithful to him, and he ends up going to look for the man who's the main character in the first book, who everyone has presumed dead. He goes down to sort of find his body in Belize, and he also knows the country very little, and most of that book is set in this sort of version of imagined Belize for me that was slightly based on places where I had set foot when I was briefly in the country. I was near a place called Placencia, and so it was actually the Christmas after my father died, and my family just wanted to be someplace we had never been with him. And I was really drawn to Belize, and so that's where we ended up for that. I don't know, it might have been 2 weeks, but so anyway, so my books, have this, I would be very curious what Belizean readers thought of the scenes that are set there. And I would not be at all surprised you sent me letters about my ignorance and foolishness. But let me just say a disclaimer that Americans reading my depictions of America could send me the same letters. So really. Anyway, so so if anyone wants copies of those books, I can send them to you. It's How Did That Dream, and then one called Ghost Lights. And I can just send them to you for free. So if you want me to, let me know, and then you can offer me your criticisms. But
all right, the members of my class, write that down. Right.
Yeah.
I will follow up on that.
I'll just say I want, please. Thank you very much. Amen.
For sure.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, I have a How the Dead Dream. This is the cover that the book I got here from a student. So I'm not sure where she had picked it up. I have to go follow up on that. But yeah. So I will follow up on that with you since you made the promise.
Yeah. Great.
Okay, so I want to say something about the class in which your work is appearing here. So a children's Bible. We're calling this class Anthropocene Fiction. It's a special topics and literature class, and you get to kind of design a course around a theme of interest to the lectures. It's very nice to have at least one class where we have this ability. And I chose to do something around the concept of the Anthropocene. So in our course, we looked at a few core texts, and then we supplemented this with readings from various fields. We had this book called Anthropocene Unseen that was published last year. That's like a series of short meditations on these various keywords. And so we had that to open up class discussions some weeks. And then we did a range of courses. So Anthropocene allowed us to look at Boccaccio's Decameron, the early part of that text, for the pandemic scenes and what the use of storytelling is in pandemic. We looked at some early silent film. We went to your book, which is near the present day. So from like 14th century Florence to near the present day US with your book. And then we're going to near the 22nd century Jamaica with Diana Macaulay's novel Daylight Come, which I have here. I could show you what that one looks like. So this is like a Caribbean novel about, the daylight kills is the little blurb at the bottom there of the text. And then we're trying to do a little bit of Zoom theater with some climate change plays that I found also published very recently. So what was nice about this class is that there were so many very recent works that we could look at, and it seemed contemporary, But we took this term Anthropocene as something that would draw all of these interests together. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on this term. How is it used in relation to your own work? What kinds of insights do you have on this word? And do you often come into contact with it, or your work gets labeled with that word as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's become obviously quite popular, initially controversial, now sort of accepted term for, as we know, the recent period in the Holocene where human behavior has become sort of the ascendant determinant of physical life systems and processes and of other creatures and of the biosphere, and really a sort of word denoting our domination. I know that the group I work for, the Center for Biological Diversity, we do mostly work trying to stop extinctions. Though we do have a large climate program called the Climate Law Institute as well. And the executive director of the center, who's also my ex-husband, he was sort of embroiled in controversy around the use of that word when it first became, sort of a currency among intellectuals. His argument was that we should not, it was more complex than this, but essentially that we shouldn't take it upon ourselves to name this time period after ourselves, that it sort of was the perfect addition of insult to injury in the process of the Anthropocene, you know, that it's sort of, it was sort of perfect symbol of our own general arrogance and hubris.
Take the flag. No?
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, people do, you know, people are writing a lot about climate fiction now, and I see that a little more often than I see Anthropocene used to refer to a couple of my recent books. But definitely, it's now just it's almost a given that term be used to refer to the crises that we've engendered.
Yeah, I wonder if even like in this, if there's some more resistance to it in science fields over you know, humanities and social science and the like as well.
So he was sort of I think he was sort of discussing it within sort of phenomenological, philosophical, and sort of political spheres, not so much with biologists, though I could be wrong. It seemed like there was a little more objection maybe among those studying humanities, but I could be off about that too.
Okay. All right, so I don't want to hog up all the questions myself. I'm going to be pointing or calling on some students to also just chime in at certain points. And I wonder if any of my students in the class have a question for Lydia here on this this topic or this idea of the Anthropocene specifically.
I had one.
All right, please.
Yeah. Hi. So I wanted to know, my question focused on a part of the book that like really attracted me, is like, because I feel that the advent of the Anthropocene brings a newness to all aspects of humanity and life on Earth. And so I wanted to know, like, in that sense, was your inclusion of queer characters purely a highlighting of the main character's age group and demonstration of the increased acceptance seen at present, or do you feel that there is some Anthropocene novelty to be found in the antiquity of queer identities?
You know, that's a good question. I think that you're probably more analytical of my text than I was in this regard. Essentially, you know, I have children who are 17 and 13, and I've been writing about this in nonfiction as well. But you know, they just their peer groups, you know, queerness and sort of trans identity and all that stuff is just such a given with them. So they're like 17 and 13, and you know, ever since they were in grade school, they've had trans friends and friends who go by different pronouns than the ones we typically used back in the day in our sort of more I don't know, at birth biology kind of ways. And they've always just been very, to them, it's completely self-evident that people should be called by the names they choose, right? And the pronouns they choose and should be who they choose to be. It's just a no-brainer for them. And so, you know, writing about kids, my own kids' age, there wasn't really another way to write about them, you know, and then sort of inclusive in that way. And of course, you know, kids talk a lot of shit too. And so they talk a lot of shit and everything. And my mother actually, at first, refused to read this book because she was so offended. She was like, I mean, she's like very progressive and everything, but she was so disgusted by the children, you know, and the way they talk. She was like, they're just so unpleasant. I really don't like them. I was like, come on, you know, I made them up, right? Like, anyway. So really, I wasn't coming to it from really like a particularly philosophical perspective, although it's fair to do so. And I, you know, I'm happy when readers are sort of more intellectually oriented toward it than I was. But for me, it was just sort of a sort of intuitive gesture about those kids and around the way I see sort of them just interacting and engaging with their friends, you know. I don't know if that's is that an okay answer or okay? Okay.
Yeah, I think some
Yes, thank you.
some members of the class were saying, yeah, well, they fully felt conversant with the kind of language and the register and everything that the kids in the book were using, because I had asked them that. So thank you, Elise, for that question. One of the recurring questions for our course was, well, I had this very general question that I asked this, a question about the uses of literature, right? So what use is literature in this era? And it's premised around all the news of climate crisis and the like that we receive, mass extinction and the like. So I wondered, given some scenes in the novel, maybe exploring this question from the negative, and I see that, what if there was no real use to literature when it comes to climate change, right? And that it's fundamentally an issue for other disciplines. And I wanted to look at a few scenes in the book where that might be suggested, specifically where the humanities comes under fire, right? Because the novel is merciless in its, its ridicule of, well, especially the despicable, the disgusting parents, but also it brings to bear, the powers of mockery on entire disciplines, and to my dismay, the humanities literature as well, because we read of the humanities instructor Darla, I think it is, in the book, who her courses are only attended out of pity, right, by the children. She only talks about herself in the courses, and only the youngest attend because she cares for them, to protect her feelings, I think it was, right? And then they have these useless professors. I think Eve's father and mother. Eve's father is an artist, and then he has these sculptures of these voluptuous women with the labels of war-torn countries covering their breasts and labia and the like, and then they sell for all this money. So one quote out of the book comes to mind, and it's this towards the end, I think chapter 9, where you write, or in the book it says, when their habitats collapsed, they had no familiar terrain, no map, no equipment, no tools. So it seems like these parents who are experts in these disciplines, like the humanities, just don't have the skill set. They don't have the right skills to survive in this age. What do you think about that? Is this critique of these useless, the ineffectuality of these kinds of disciplines for addressing the current problems that we have?
Well, it's funny. I mean, it is sort of satirical in those moments, yeah. and of course also, I'm critiquing myself sort of and my kind in all of this. My father was an Egyptologist, so for example, so in terms of esoteric, disciplines. But actually, I believe quite the reverse, that I believe that the humanities really are our salvation, or should be in many ways. Yeah, I have gotten several letters from friends of mine, because I have a lot of academic friends. I'm not an academic, but I have a lot of professor friends, and the vast majority are in the humanities. And so they wrote me some very funny emails about Darla, of course, is not a genuine scholar. She wears the mantle of that within the context of, she's teaching humanities, which is like personal narrative in her context. But really what I believe is that at least in the United States, and I've seen this to some degree in Europe, where I studied in France and England and Germany when I was younger. Not as much in Europe, more in the United States, but even in Europe, there's sort of falling away of education in vital parts of the humanities, things that we used to, my parents' generation learned, civics, ethics, even the learning of multiple different languages, of classics, of classical literature, etc. The fact that all this has fallen away, I think, is profoundly dangerous to U.S. culture and to other cultures, because of the power and military and economic might of American culture. So I actually think the decline of the humanities as a sort of value in in civil society has been tragic for us. But there's also a thing happening in this novel where I sort of wanted to make a distinction between sort of denialism, sort of like denialist groups and demographics in mainstream U.S. culture, and those groups, like the parents of the children in this story, who really are not denialist, but find other ways to evade responsibility for action against the crisis. Complacency or radical hope or simple passivity, all the ways in which perfectly sort of good people, you don't have to be a Trumpist or whatever to evade responsibility for action on climate change. This has happened sort of across the spectrum in this country and for many decades. And so I was here sort of looking at that, sort of those group of people who had no problem with the science, but simply failed to be able to act for various sort of deep-seated, psychological and emotional reasons. And so that humanities mockery sort of slid in sideways into that. But it, yes, in no way represents the opinions of the author.
Yeah. All right, thank you for that. Maybe I give a chance, like a one in, one out for some of my students as well. Did anybody else have a question among the students on that note?
I have a question. Hello. So
Agatha.
yes, my name is Agatha. As literature students, I'm a student of this course, and I was just considering how, we affirm that literature is powerful and is able to accomplish what other forms of communication might not be able to accomplish. And so in this way, actually there's a concern, or we could say that in some areas, reading books, just the habit or the culture of reading books might be a dying culture in modern society, where it seems that in some areas people move away from reading books as a form of pastime. And so obviously as authors, I believe that they write in a way to reach society and hopefully move society to hopefully mobilize them, especially with the Anthropocene. So in a children's Bible, especially, there's a sense of urgency and a plea for society to cooperate and helping to, I guess, save the planet. So I just wanted to know if you think that writing fiction will reach enough people to make a difference, and if you think that the reading audience is big enough to help reverse or end the damage that has been done to planet Earth.
I mean, that's such a that's a really important question, of course. It's also very difficult. The short answer, if you want me to be completely blunt, is that no, of course, I can't change the world with this book. But so many things are being written, and not just books, but texts in so many formats, and also beyond text, right? So the way that the cultures across the world are expressing themselves now in art and in entertainment and all sorts of media and forms, I think around the crisis of climate and also of extinction, I think is beginning finally to make a serious dent, right? I feel hopeful about that. And I think even that we're having this conversation here, I don't think we would have been having the same conversation 20 years ago, but we could have been. We could have been. There was just as much to do then. It was very urgent then, but we weren't having this conversation, and a lot of people weren't having this conversation. So I do believe, finally, policy is what we need now. Policy, money has to go to the right places. I mean, it's fairly simple. Money has to be taken away from the wrong places and put in the right places, right? So, and my book can't do that, but my book and others, so many others that touch on these things, and there's lots of cases where, it's just a touch. It can even just be a glancing touch onto these things. I believe all of that is sort of, it is sort of a contagion that we transmit and convey among us, right? There's bad contagion and good contagion, just like bad money and good money. And the sort of fear, but the fear that we feel, I think, about climate has become contagious now. And I also think there's hope, forms of hope associated with that acknowledgement of fear that can also go far to save us and save the rest of what is. But I also think on a very practical level, we all know we have very little time. And so it's a mistake to be Pollyanna about it and to say that art is going to save us in 10 years from what various forms of colonialism and capitalism have wrought over centuries, right? So really also we need to get out there in the streets and we need to vote for the candidates and policies that are going to save us quickly. And we actually require radical action also. So I think that it's disingenuous to even have this kind of conversation without mentioning that, this is a critical time and we don't have long. And so we do need to act. I mean, each of us, and we also need to resist, resist the indoctrination that it's all up to us, because of course we're just individual people, and really who is most responsible is corporations and governments, and they shouldn't be allowed to manipulate us into thinking it's our fault, because it's not. It's not my children's fault, who are 13 and 17, that this is the way it is. It's not your fault. So those interests have to be held accountable. I don't think it's quite possible to discuss these matters in a sort of erudite pretense to neutrality kind of way. I don't think these things can be omitted. So that's what I've got for you on that. Sorry, a bit of a diatribe.
No, that was excellent. I want to build on what you said there about, what you said previously about satire, and then also the effectiveness of the novel for inspiring action. And we were in the class, we were drawing on a theorist, Ursula Heise. I don't know if you know. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And she's
I've met her. Yeah, she's great. Oh, yeah.
Prolific as well. She writes so much and so well. But she has commented on how modern environmentalists have tended to rely on this similar story template. And in her words, modern society has degraded a natural world that used to be beautiful, harmonious, self-sustaining, that might disappear completely if humans do not change their ways. And it's linked to this idea of a foreboding sense of looming destruction. But in your book, you employ humor, satire to great effect. I think I read in an article, I think it was in London Review of Books, and this one writer was saying that he cited you among a few other American writers that were truly committed to satire as a mode. I think he mentioned also Paul Beatty, along with yourself. And in the Children's Bible, there is this brief mention or allusion, at least one that I picked up right at the end, where, you made it quite explicit, to Voltaire, I think it was. This quote, "All we can do is cultivate our garden," right? That Eve's mother gives to the children. So I think Ursula Heise's point was that elegy and tragedy are working to elicit sympathy, but how effective are they for inspiring action? And I wonder if satire as a mode you specifically select as a differently effective or more effective mode. I wonder, would you comment on that? How committed are you to satire and its power?
So I would say that, yes, some books I've written are sort of more broadly satirical. Like one called George Bush, Dark Prince of Love, which was written a long time ago. It's about the elder Bush, actually, not the younger.
Oh.
That's how old it is. And lately one called Mermaids in Paradise is fairly satirical. But what I'm what I'm truly committed to is humor in some form. So whether it's satirical or not. So I just love to, I have written a couple of books where you don't really, where it's difficult to laugh, you know, at any point. But most of my books have some, and the books I love to read also, most of them have some element of humor. Recently, just because I like to make myself laugh as I'm writing, and I also like to sort of have tears in my eyes when I finish a book because I'm sentimental, you know. I just am, but I also like to laugh. And recently I was thinking about, empathy, and when we do and don't have empathy for other forms of life, and particularly with regard to livestock and animals that we eat and stuff, and you know how often their suffering is invoked as that which should inspire empathy in us.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's even more painful sometimes to feel empathy. It's more painful and more acute sometimes to think of the joy, of the capacity of joy of other kinds of life forms. I think, so myself, when I think of the joy of other animals, it's actually more painful for me to imagine their suffering than when I imagine their suffering. In other words, it's not, I think that joy is a really, is a source of communion for us, and can be a source of inspiration. And because it has this exuberant, this sort of ecstatic or rapturous quality, maybe we should look there more often, and look to tragedy less compulsively sometimes than we do when we're trying to evoke fellow feeling, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's sort of just lateral kind of comment. I mean, it doesn't directly answer your question, but.
Oh, that's good. I like that. All right, I'm looking at the time. It's such a terribly short amount of time that I had allotted. I did want to give a few people from the class and outside, if they had any questions, they could just raise their hand. I think in this we have that raise your hand function. So if there are others in the group that would like to ask questions, go ahead. And is there one of my students want to follow up on that that response?
Go for it, anyone. April, I saw raised a hand, and then wait, someone else.
So
Now
you're seeing these things that I'm not seeing. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I saw them. They went up and down again, and I don't really know how to interact. And
Okay,
Jane, yeah.
Jane,
That's right.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry I can't put on my camera because I'm at work, but I wanted to ask, I have two questions for you. Maybe I could tie both of them together in one. But I saw that in your book, you really use the children to be, the voices and the saving graces on the island, and their parents are seen as like bums, like they're always drinking, always partying, always caring about everything other than the hurricane that's about to hit and that is about to ruin. But the kids are the ones who they're preparing, they're trying to, after the damage has come and the flood has come, they're the ones trying to create a better life for themselves. So I wanted to know, I know that in this present day we always say, the youths are integral for climate activism, and they're very important, and they're the ones that will lead and change. Was you know was your use of the young people as the main characters and the main changers in your book, did you use young people because they will be affected more than the older folks, if climate is really to get more horrible than it is? And then the second question I have is, I know that I saw a few times you reference, or not really reference, but you use some forms of the Bible in your children's Bible. So I wanted to know, what was your intention for doing that? I know that the tree house that they stayed in, it was called the Ark, and you also added in some other biblical references. I wanted to know, what was your intention for doing that? And then also, while the kid was reading the picture Bible or seeing the picture Bible, um, I thought that he was going to think that it was, I don't remember the kid's name. It was going to be used like as a prophecy to tell them, okay, this already happened before, this could happen again. But it seemed more like they used it like to reference how things get, or how the situation escalates when us as humans are disconnected and distant from nature. So I wanted to know what was your intention there.
Well, that's a lot. All very wise and good questions. So I'm just going to see if I can be brief in answering them, so we can get to other questions as well. Maybe one. Yes, I wanted to write specifically in this book about the sort of anger between this intergenerational anger that I see among the young, and not always as young as the characters here, but 20 somethings and even 30 somethings, but also my children's friends. You know, I really wanted to write about that anger they have toward my generation, which I feel is a pure and righteous anger, which I sympathize with and feel myself. You can feel anger toward your own generation and even toward yourself, right? So that was why I chose the children, chose people of that age to be sort of central to the story of the book and to the narration of it. I think the second question was about, let's see, the third question was about the Bible. I'll answer the Bible question, maybe. The Bible, so it was just sort of nostalgic for me, in part because I was remembering all these illustrated Bible stories that were my mother's when she was growing up in the South in the United States. And I used to look at those, and the cover of this book, the picture there sort of reflects the aesthetic of those Bible stories that I used to look at in the summer when we would go down to her old home, to my grandparents' home. And I also chose to use sort of, you know, parables and moments and images from the Bible to sort of hang some of the symbolism and the plot on. In the case of the plot, because it gave me an easy framework and sort of skeleton to use. And I'm not very interested in plot generally. So I always like to steal other people's plots if possible. So in this case, the Holy Scriptures. And then what was the middle question again? Professor DeShield, do you remember? What was the middle question?
It was just those two. I just said it.
Okay. All right. I don't know if that's sufficient, but there you go.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, I think looking at that Bible part two, there's this. I think one of the students in the class, and we had a little conversation about it, looking at the purpose of a children's Bible and how it was sort of aimed at, you know, there's some truths, there's truth as story in the Bible, but then it's modified for this particular audience. And then someone in the class was talking about how, well, this very book, which seems to be aimed at the adults, has got the title Children's Bible, and is it also making these hard truths more palatable for that generation or that audience? Difficult truths. And it brought to mind this quote from John Donne, where he talks, you know, in glorious terms about the Bible and how it has such sinews even in its milk. I think even in thy milk. So maybe there's that hard truth, but even in this milk, this spoon-fed story that's given you to.
Okay. I'm going to steal that too, because you just said it far better than I did. So yeah, I'm going to have to steal your language on that.
So yeah, I wonder if there's a beautiful scene in there in chapter 9, I think, where Eve is she's angry because her parents refused to read her a sign at a street protest. You know, and it's like the parents are intentionally keeping the kids in the dark about crucial issues because they need to get to this restaurant, I think, where the reservations are, it's terribly difficult to get a seat or a space in there. That's more important than this street protest with people having these signs, and the kid is obviously interested and she's being kept away from it intentionally. So it's such a disservice to the kids, you know, by the parent. All right, we've gone over the time that I had allotted. Do we have some questions from other persons in the group or students that we can sneak in here?
I didn't have a question. I kind of just had like well, maybe it's a question. Sorry. um, so I'm not a student. Dr. DeSheila invited me to this session. I didn't even read the book. He invited me to this session late. So this is all your fault.
Yes.
But I was not able to read the book. So I'm very, very sorry. But I'm listening to the conversation. And my background is in anthropology. And so I'm quite shocked maybe, but this is probably just my naivety at the fact that no one before the younger generations, I would say, read about the Anthropocene or well, maybe not the term Anthropocene, but the ideas of it, because anthropology is all about, you know, human behavior and interaction and that sort of stuff. And where do you first think about culture and human interaction with environment? And I kind of just had like maybe a food for thought for those of you. I don't remember whose question it was. I think it was Agatha's question. So there's this controversial archaeologist historian guy called Jared Diamond. And he's controversial for a lot of reasons, right? When it comes to like colonialism and his writings about colonialism, we don't want to read that. But he does have a very interesting article that is called "The Worst Mistake in the History of the Human Race," and he discusses agriculture as being one of our dying threats to humanity, because that's when we kind of settled and, you know, started to interact with the environment and basically planted the seeds of what is to come in climate change today. And that was written in 1987. So it's quite a read. It's open to your interpretation as a person. I like to use it as devil's advocate when we're talking about interaction with the world in culture, because for archaeologists and anthropologists, we like to believe that you know, human behavior and human interaction is the way we can move up in society. And how we interact with the environment, that's an entirely different conversation to begin with. So I just kind of wanted to throw those seeds out there. I think that was for Agatha's question, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're ever interested in that kind of stuff, that is that's the way to go. But if anybody has like a comment for that, that would be great. But I'm going to read your book, Dr. DeShield. I'm going to read the book, but I was very interested in the fact that it has this kind of conversation to begin with, because you don't see a lot of literature talking about climate change in this kind of way. So I really hope to read the book by the end of the week, Doc. By the end of the week. Okay.
I just want to say, also, if people are interested in those sorts of ideas, you know, and maybe you've already read him, but there's this, I haven't actually read him for a long time, but he was very trendy in the early 90s, 2000s, American writer named Daniel Quinn, who coined the term totalitarian agriculture to sort of describe, right? So like that's also in the realm of what April's brought up with regard to Jared Diamond and some of his writings. And yeah, he is controversial, but you know, interesting, especially his writings on ecocide and like rapamycin and the you know, the giant heads are from Easter Island. Yes, the whole Easter Island situation. You know, he's interesting, but yeah. So there's sort of a lot of writers in sort of nonfiction, and even certain kinds of like spec fiction who have discussed the effect of, say, monocultures on our ideology as well as on the natural world.
Great. I wonder if we can get a few more questions in. Lydia, can we extend it till 3, or are you?
Yeah, we can do like a couple more minutes. I'm a little behind on, I'm actually in my, I'm like,
You're at work.
It was Jane. Yeah, I'm working. I'm actually at my job, but I will take until 2 o'clock if you guys are available. So like about 10 more minutes, or okay. 3 o'clock your time.
Yeah, 3 o'clock.
Yeah, and people also can email me questions if they want to that I can write back to later. So if people don't have enough time, it's like or you're still interested, or you're still just a little bit through the book or whatever, feel free.
That works well. I think we have a question from Matthew Menzies. And Ivory Kelly after. Matthew?
I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of. Can you hear me
too.
now?
Yeah, that sounds good now.
Okay. I just wanted to say I just finished your book this morning, Lydia Millet, and I'm Christopher DeShield's cousin.
Yeah.
But Belize is such a small town that way. I just wanted to express that I was really appreciative of your repurposing of the Holy Trinity within your narrative, and I wanted you to speak more about a lot of these climate change discussions are usually between monotheists and atheists, and so being like a Christian climate activist, that might be something to talk about. I think for me, that's what really set your book apart from most other content of this genre. I'm thinking like Hunger Games or Divergent or this sort of like early literature talking about the apocalypse. Usually those are just completely devoid of any religion at all. And so I wanted to kind of offer you a slow pitch on that.
Thank you for that. I've thought a lot in recent years about sort of like ecumenical sort of approaches to faith and how they might intersect with activism on some of these matters. Also, extinction, you know, all those interlaced sort of crises of the natural world in the Anthropocene. For some reason, that's hard for me to pronounce, Anthropocene. Anyway, there's one book I wrote called Sweet Lamb of Heaven that is more centrally about religion and more centrally sort of philosophically tries to look at why science and faith are not antithetical to each other. And I'm very interested in that in general, consistently, because it's been so schismatic and so divisive, and it has given such a lever to the right wing in this country, such a destructive lever, and it seems like a desecration of Christianity, of faith. Often the way that sort of the oligarchs in this country have co-opted Christianity, right? So I've thought a lot about sort of just finding a way to write sort of emotionally and with some aspect of I want to say theory, but I'm not really that kind of intellectual, but sort of philosophical abstractions about just ways we might understand universalities among all these things, and how we might get a grip on how not to be threatened by other people's ideas in these realms. Yeah. So thank you for mentioning that. Thank you.
Good. I like that. I want to build on that idea that Matthew posted there too. Well, what's striking is you look at the history of like developmental biology, and you get all of these priest scientists, theologian scientists, and the two, it's these theological questions that prompted a lot of the scientific discoveries, and then vice versa. You have this intertwining of concerns from way back that you would think it's insane that they would be, positioned as somehow diametrically opposed or whatever.
Right.
But at the end of your book, you have what Matthew was saying. There's this Trinitarian formula that you have, right? You have that art is taking up the role of the Holy Ghost in this correlation, right? This correspondence here, and I wondered, so while some forms of scientific literacy are obviously crucial to addressing climate change, you're suggesting here that art must be equally important. It's part of this trinity. I wonder if how your work at the Center for Biological Diversity meshes with this novel writing role. Is this part of the same? It's part of the same formula, the same trinity. So is it like do your work and both sides share the same objective? I guess is the question I'm asking.
Yeah, absolutely the same objective. I don't want to represent that I'm a powerful, important employee of the center. There are many sort of very ingenious lawyers and scientists that work for us, and I'm the chief editor, right? So I do editing and writing, but I have been there for what, 23 years now, and before that, I was studying. I was studying to try to work in conservation, essentially. I did a really boring master's degree at Duke University in like resource economics and policy, which was a sort of a, you know, the kind of environmental economics where you learn about the valuation of environmental amenities and sort of applying neoclassical microeconomics and free market notions to caretaking the natural world. So I did that degree. Yeah, and but I did not become an economist of any kind. So please don't mistake me for one. Anyway, so I just really, the work that I do at the center is mostly to, you know, it's basically just taking the words of scientists and lawyers and trying to make those easier for people like me, regular people, to kind of to read, and for journalists to pick up and talk about. So really just trying to translate sort of wonky language into lay person's language. So that's the kind of work I do, but there's very little we do at work that I don't believe in profoundly. I mean, you know, we fight for just these little critters, and you know, like all things great and small. And it's a, you know, I think it's a sacred mission of a sort. So so yeah, there's definitely an overlap.
Thank you. I think we have one. We're going to sneak in one more question. Ivory Kelly had raised her hand. Can we get your question there, Ivory?
Thank you, Chris. And Dr. Millet, I apologize that, or I regret that I have not yet had a chance to read the novel either. I got very recent notification, but I do look forward to it, and I'm happy that Christopher was able to invite me. But I was just wondering, what aspect of the researching of the novel did you find most enjoyable and most challenging? I was just curious about that.
Well, thanks for asking. I most of the research I did for this particular book was just, you know, the magic of Google, if I'm honest with you. So I have done real research, real sort of in-person research for some books in the past, but not so much this one. This one was really just written sort of from the heart and without much new sort of like primary seeking of information. It was based on sort of memory and family and just nearby things, you know. But I have done like research that was really important to me for certain books. I wrote this one book called Open and Radiant Heart. It was about the Manhattan Project physicists, the invention of, you know, the atomic bomb. And for that, I did a ton of research at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and also the Trinity site, not too far from where I live, and, you know, the Nevada test site. So all kinds of nuclear sites. And that was like really kind of heartbreaking and strange research. So I have had moments of genuinely pretending to be a journalist. But this book was not among them. But thank you for asking.
Thank you very much. It's a very valuable answer, because we do have here in the meeting some students who are enrolled in our creative writing courses, and it's good for them to know that there are various types of research, and Googling alone is an incredibly valuable source. So thank you for that.
All right. Thank you so much, Lydia Millet, for this wonderful session. We extended the time, so I really appreciate you stayed with us for this. And it's already 3 o'clock. I've got lots of students that have other classes, but I want to thank everyone here for joining and participating here. It was fascinating. I hope to do other types of things like this now that we have the technology and we're aware of it. It's right in front of us. But a special thank you, Lydia, for joining us here. This was fascinating, and thank you so much for your time.
It was really fun. I really like to sort of meet you all. So thank you, and thank you, Professor DeShield. And okay. Don't worry. You can email me all you want. Anyone can email me. So I have a website. It has my same name. So feel free if you want to. Okay. And remember to send me the addresses to send books to if you want me to.
All right.
Okay.
you so much. Will do.
Cheers. Bye.
All right. Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.